What do Prince Derek, Queen Una, the Archdruidess, Sagatha, Gretel, Edith, and many other characters from Disenchantment all have in common? They're all voiced by Tress MacNeille. I'm a fan of Disenchantment. It got off to a bit of a rocky start, but ever since part 3 ended, I've been waiting for the next episode with bated breath. And while the series has many strengths, from its animation to its stunning amount of Easter eggs, foreshadowing, and hidden details, there's one aspect that doesn't seem to get the recognition it should, and that's Tress MacNeille's voice acting. Now, Disenchantment has a stellar voice cast. It's possibly the best part of the entire experience. I could spend an entire video talking about that, but I won't. Suffice it to say, you could watch an episode of Disenchantment with your eyes closed the whole time and still have a great time. But there is a spot of Bethesda RPG syndrome.
How goes it? What? You gotta like a store named... Go ahead. I think we're in for some hard times. The death... Beast... Go ahead.
That is, there's a lot of roles shared by not so many voice actors. Billy West does a bunch, David Herman does a few, but no one does as many as Tress. And no one else creates such distinct characters. Just look at the Jester and Scruffles. I think these are supposed to be different voices, but half the time I couldn't tell the difference. If it weren't for the fact that one's a cat. Sure, Sorcerio sounds different, but come on, none of this is a patch on the differences between Derek, Una, the Druidess, and on and on. It's not just differentiating characters from one another though, they're all really good performances in their own right. Each main Tress MacNeille character has their own vocal mannerisms, and a lot of the humour comes from these, rather than the script she's reading.
Derek and Una, I'm gonna miss her.
I mean, it's nothing new. She practically voiced every other female character on The Simpsons and Futurama. You could very well argue that she's the secret weapon of these shows too, or indeed plenty others. To be honest, I didn't quite realise how prolific a voice actor she was until I started researching this video. But if anything, that just speaks further to how unrecognisable she is in some of these roles. And so rather than making a generic video of praise, which you could make for any of these shows, I wanted to make something unique to Disenchantment. So I'm going to tell you a crackpot theory about the show's future I've developed, based entirely upon Tress MacNeille's voice work and multi-rolling. First things first, what do I mean by multi-rolling? Well, it's a theatrical term for one actor portraying multiple different characters in the same play. Nowadays it's most common in theatre inspired by the German playwright Bertolt Brecht. In Brechtian multi-rolling, one actor playing multiple roles is supposed to stick out, throw you off, and take you out of the play. You see, it was important to Brecht that audiences remember the fictionality of what they were watching, and not get too emotionally involved in the story. In a nutshell, the idea was this way, you wouldn't see only characters and emotional drama, but you'd instead be in a more receptive position to whatever moral or political messages the play you're watching could tell you, and you'd be able to more easily see your own world in a new light. But multi-rolling has been around for a lot longer than this. In early modern theatre, at the time of figures like Shakespeare, there weren't enough actors to play all the characters which might be in a certain play, so they'd double up. As a result, playwrights would have to be very aware of which character could be where at what point when writing, so there could always be just enough actors to portray all the characters in a given scene. Mark Bayer writes, due to the number of characters present in early modern history plays, doubling roles was a necessity for any successful performance and was a practice common to all theatrical companies. But because this technique detracts from the realistic identification of actor and character, theatre historians have sometimes assumed that doubling was, at best, a necessary evil. Bayer goes on to note that while some plays of the time, like Shakespeare's, often struggled with doubling roles, other plays, like Thomas Haywood's Aegis series, actually embraced the convention. Just like with Brecht, the audience was sometimes supposed to notice when one actor played multiple roles, maybe to ironically compare the two characters, or maybe it was just supposed to be funny if some big burly warrior type changed his costume and came back as a dainty forest nymph. So, and hear me out, I wonder if we see this dynamic in Disenchantment. Now, I'm not trying to say that every time a cartoon reuses voice actors, it's for some grand artistic purpose. The practice is common in modern animation, whether it's to save costs or it's just part of the nature of the medium. It's not often, though, that we have what amounts to nearly an entire subplot of one actor talking to themselves. I'm talking about Part 3, Episode 3, entitled Beanie Get Your Gun. To recap, after Zog and Bean return to Dreamland, Derek is shut out of the castle and barrel rolls his way to the Enchanted Forest. In here, he has a few misadventures, including having all his money and trousers taken, until he meets the fairy Sagatha and enters the hidden fairy zone of the Enchanted Forest. Here, Derek learns a few life lessons, gets his stuff back, and then falls in love with Sagatha. Later on, they even share some scenes with the Archdruidess, another character voiced by Tress MacNeille. Similar to the use of multi-rolling bear finds in Hayward, this isn't disguised. We're overtly given an entire subplot where a majority of the scenes find one actor playing multiple roles. Now it's tinfoil hat time. So, theatrical multi-rolling was very common in Shakespeare's day, yeah? Well, some plays from that time used multi-rolling so cleverly that even modern productions still do it, even though there's no need to anymore. Specifically, since Peter Brook introduced the practice in the 70s, it's common for productions of A Midsummer Night's Dream to double the roles of Titania and Oberon with Hippolyta and Theseus. So this latter pair are the King and Queen of Athens, the play's mortal world, and their actors also play Oberon and Titania, rulers of the fairy world in the Enchanted Forest. A fairy world in an enchanted forest? Sounds familiar, no? Yes, this is exactly what we see in Beanie Get Your Gun. Now, I don't think any of this is accidental. Disenchantment had previously done an entire episode riffing on early modern theatre and its tropes. Part 2, Episode 8, called In Her Own Right. Disenchantment more widely seems to riff on Shakespeare from time to time. I won't go into it now, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of Zog's arc in Part 3 is at least loosely referential to King Lear. And accidentally or not, Derek's plot in Beanie Get Your Gun reads almost as an intentional parody of A Midsummer Night's Dream. So what's the relevance of multi-rolling to all this? The common interpretation between the multi-rolling in Midsummer Night's Dream is, in a nutshell, that the royal couples are written to sort of be each other's symbolic doubles. The play ends in a marriage between the lovers we've been following throughout, but there's also perhaps a sense of unity restored between the dream world of the forest and the waking world of Athens. Beanie Get Your Gun ends on a similar note, or at least the Derek-Sagatha subplot does. Until the wedding is interrupted by the Archdruidess, Derek and Sagatha come close to tying the knot, and just as A Midsummer Night's Dream ends with a reunification of Athens and the dream world, represented by a multi-rolled king and queen, this wedding would technically unite Dreamland and the hidden fairy town within the Enchanted Forest. Remember, Derek was pretty useless before his night in the Enchanted Forest, but after his experiences in there, he became able to face up to the foes of the forest. He even starts to grow facial hair. The show seems to be telling us that Derek's link to the world of the forest fairies makes him stronger and more mature. I mean, I'm not going to touch the whole clearly elderly fairy marrying an infant side of this, but I do wonder if Beanie Get Your Gun intentionally evokes the multi-rolling of A Midsummer Night's Dream in order to signal a character change in Derek, one which unites his Dreamland identity with a fairy one. I mean, even after the episode, we see him hanging out with fairies. This is pretty clearly going to continue on in some way, maybe a subplot in Part 4, maybe beyond. But why does any of this matter? Well, here's the crackpot theory. There's hints that at some point in the show's future, there will be some sort of major war, perhaps over Dreamland. At the end of Part 3, the elves have just discovered Dreamland was their ancient home, taken from them by Zog's ancestors. Mora's song to Bean in Last Splash is pretty ominous too.
And someday if there's a war on some not so distant shore and lines are drawn, I'm never gone.
And Steamland is seeming more and more belligerent. And I think if this does happen, that maybe Derek's subplot in Beanie Get Your Gun could be setting up a hero turn for Derek. Maybe Sagatha turns out to be fairy royalty, and she and Derek lead an army of woodland folk into the battle and save the day. Yeah, like I said, it's not much, but if it happens, and I predicted it correctly, who'll be the crazy one then? Not me, I'm not crazy.
Okay, I'm done.
So yeah, if you've stuck around this far, I'm impressed. This video idea went off the rails faster than Zog in a minecart.
That was so fast! And painful.
But I've got more, and probably better Disenchantment video ideas, so stick around if you're as into this show as I am. And make sure to slap that MF like button like it's a trog's backside in the full moon.